waiting in King Island to be brought back. So we don't know what was going on there. The story was that he was going to pick up crayfish, or at least one crayfish, for a party. He was involved in the air cadet training thing. He was an air cadet.
Okay.
And they were going to have some sort of a party at Melbourne Airport, and he was going to bring back a crayfish for this thing that was going to happen at about 9 o'clock that evening.
Sure.
And he left about 6:15, 10 past 6, 6:15.
It was nice. Just jump in his plane and go and get some tucker for the barbecue.
Yeah, that's it. Now, not his plane, of course. So he wasn't a wealthy kid. He was only 20 years old. He couldn't afford to have his own plane. But he had an instrument rating, and he could fly with instruments at night. He was flying down to King Island. Now, he got to Cape Otway, or he sighted Cape Otway. He said, right, at Cape Otway, now proceeding to King Island, at just a few minutes past 7 p.m. Okay? And it was in October, so it was still daylight. And I remember the day. I remember seeing a plane go over. I've always wondered, I remember seeing a blue and white Cessna heading into the sunset at about 6:15, but I don't think you could get to Cape Otway in 3/4 of an hour. It takes a bit longer, I think.
Sure.
It's about a 4-hour drive, but in a plane it's a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can get there in 3/4 of an hour. I don't think you get there in 3/4 of an hour.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said that he got there. He said he radioed in. Now they keep recordings of all the conversations with the pilots.
Yeah, sure.
It's never been released.
Yeah, right.
This recording's never been released, but a transcript of it has been, which is this is in this book that Haynes wrote about.
Yeah.
This case is what. Where did I put that book? Missing Pilot. Here it is. Missing Melbourne episode case study of a missing pilot.
Yeah.
And this is all about the Valentich case. And the transcript of the recording is in here, and it's very, very interesting. Now, what happened was, about 6.5 minutes after he reported that he was now heading towards King Island,
Yeah.
I'll read out the transcript so you can hear exactly what he said.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Okay, this is what he said. After he's been flying over the ocean away from the Victorian mainland, heading towards King Island, for about 6 and a bit minutes, he calls in. He says, "Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000?" Okay, so he's seen something flying near him. He knows that he's flying at about 4,500 feet.
Yeah.
And he's asking them, "Is there anything below 5,000?" And the report from the air traffic supervisor is no known traffic.
Yeah.
All right. Then he says, Delta Sierra Juliet, seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. And so they call back, they say, Delta Sierra Juliet, what type of aircraft is it? He says, I cannot affirm. It is 4 bright lights, seems to be like landing lights. And they say, okay, Delta Sierra Juliet. And he says, Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above.
Okay.
And they go, Delta Sierra Juliet, roger that. And is it a large aircraft? Confirm. And it says, unknown due to the speed it's travelling. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity? And then he gets back straight away. He says, Delta Sierra Juliet, no known aircraft in the vicinity.
Yeah, right.
Right. So now they know there's something going on.
Yeah.
And they don't know what.
Yeah.
Right. Now he's flying in uncontrolled airspace.
What does that mean?
Because he's outside of, he's not in a
yeah.
controlled zone area.
Sure, okay,
He's in uncontrolled airspace.
Yeah.
So he's not talking to an air traffic controller. He's talking to an air traffic advisor because he's in uncontrolled airspace. He can do what he likes.
Yeah.
If he wants. A couple of minutes later, he says, Melbourne, it's approaching now from due east towards me. And he gets a response, Delta Sierra Juliet. Then there's this open, it says here, open mic for 5 seconds, for a few seconds. It's a funny sound, like when you turn on the microphone and you go to speak. He turns it on, but he doesn't say anything. So he's watching something. But you hear an unusual sound over the radio when he, on that part of the recording. And it's kind of it's the sort of the carrier signal of the radio, but it's kind of it's sort of chopping.
Yeah, right.
Sort of like there's something interfering with
Yeah.
sort of sound coming through the radio. There's other aircraft calling in, and you hear them, and there's no unusual sounds with them. But every time this guy speaks, it's a sound the whole time.
Sure.
Then it says, Delta Sierra Juliet, it seems to me that he's playing some sort of game, flying over me at 2 and 3 times at speeds that I cannot identify. And so then the advisor says, Delta Sierra Juliet, what is your actual level? And he says, my level is 4,500, 4500. So now he has to be pretty high to be in radio contact anyway, because of the curvature of the Earth. He's a fair distance from Melbourne. Anyway, he says, and Delta Sierra Juliet, can you confirm that you cannot identify the aircraft? And straight away says affirmative. So he's got this object flying around him, and he doesn't know what it is. He hasn't called it a UFO. He's got something flying around him, he doesn't know what it is. And so Delta Sierra Juliet, Roger, stand by. What can you do? You're on the end of a radio.
Stand by.
What can you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we have. There's no known aircraft there.
And that's that.
What are they going to do about it?
Now, at this point, this is the beginning. At this point, you hear somebody in the background on tape saying, "Oh, look, we've got a guy flying down a Cape Otway. Have you got anything on the radar?" And the guy said, "No, I haven't got anything on the radar at all." You hear that in the background. Right? That's not on the transcript. And then he says, Melbourne, Delta Sierra Juliet, can you describe the aircraft? And he says, Delta Sierra Juliet, as it's flying past, it's a long shape. Then you hear this of the radio again. Then he says, I cannot identify more than that. And as he's speaking, you're hearing that too, that sound. As he's speaking, he says, cannot identify more than that. It has such speed. Then there's more of this sound. And this is, it's before me right now, Melbourne. And the guy listening to this says, Delta Sierra Juliet, how large would the object be? And the pilot says, Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne, it seems like it's chasing me. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic-like, and it's all shiny on the outside. He says, and it's all shiny on the outside. That's exactly how he said it. It's all shiny on the outside. Right? And Delta Sierra Juliet, and then again you hear this sound, and then he says, Melbourne, it's just vanished.
Yeah.
Right? And then
they
go, okay, Delta Sierra Juliet, the guy talking back to him says then, he said, Melbourne, would you know what kind of aircraft, the pilot is calling back, Melbourne, would you know what kind of aircraft I've got? Is it a military aircraft? So he's asking again, have you got any military aircraft?
Help me.
Right? And the answer is, he's mixed up the pages here. We're getting close to the end of this bit. He says, Delta Sierra Juliet, can you confirm that the aircraft has just vanished? And he says, say again, Delta Sierra Juliet, is the aircraft still with you? And the pilot says, it's now, and then you hear this again, is now approaching from the southwest. And Delta Sierra Juliet, and he says, then the pilot says, Delta Sierra Juliet, the engine is rough idling. I've got it set at 2324, and the thing is coughing. So not only has the radio got this sound, now his engine is playing up.
Right.
Now at that point, when a pilot is a fair distance from an airport or anywhere he can land, he's over the sea, and he's saying, I've got engine trouble, that changes everything. That puts you in an alert phase at that point, right? And that's what. And on the tape, you hear the guys in the background asking about radar and all this sort of stuff. And it says it's coughing. And now, so the advisor says, "Okay, Delta Sierra Juliet, what are your intentions?" And the pilot says, "My intentions are to go to King Island, Melbourne. That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again." And he says, "It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft."
Perfect.
Right? And then the guy just says, Delta Sierra Juliet. And then he calls back again, the pilot, but he gets his call sign around the wrong way, and he says, Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. He should be saying Melbourne. This is Delta Sierra Juliet. He says it the wrong way around. And then you hear this unusual sound. He doesn't say anymore. And you hear this really unusual sound. And that's the end. you hear this really weird sound, and he was never found, and the plane was never found.
Yeah, right.
They never found even an oil slick in the water,
Really?
and he and the plane disappeared, and he was at 4,500 feet at the time he disappeared. And the sound on the tape, if I could sort of imitate it,
Yep.
it sounds like
Oh, yeah, sure.
that kind of noise, but a metallic rattle, like just like that.
Yeah, right.
And a click, 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 click as well, because he's clicking like he's clicking the mic on and off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you get this rattling sound like that for about 15 seconds,
Yeah, right.
and that's it.
That's it.
It's
So
like
that's a big one. Yeah, right. So was that ever on the news or anything?
Yeah, it was right in the news. The next day they transcribed the tape and put it in the papers the next day. It got straight out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
And the government says there's never been any cover up. They just put it straight out there for everybody.
Yeah, great.
Because it was so bizarre, nobody was going to believe it anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the parents of this pilot had to have to believe it.
Yeah,
Their son is still missing,
certainly.
without a trace, missing, presumed dead.
Yeah, certainly. Well,
But
I
he
mean,
could be in another part of the universe. He could be alive.
Alive and well.
You just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, certainly.
Now, I've
He
been
could-
trying for several years to get that tape.
Yeah,
And I still haven't got a copy of it, but I've been allowed to listen to it.
All right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I managed to get in contact with the right guy. It all comes down to the right
Yeah,
person.
certainly. Yeah.
And I rang this guy up and I said, you wouldn't have a copy of that tape, would you? He said, yeah, I have actually. I said, would you have any objection to me having a listen to it? He said, no. So I went around there a few weeks later
Yeah.
and what I've found with this, over the last couple of years, I've discovered a lot of people have kept copies of it,
Yeah.
right? And but they can't even listen to it themselves anymore because they've got it on a cassette or a reel-to-reel. Who has a reel-to-reel or a cassette player anymore?
Exactly.
So I've had to get really good equipment, and I got a couple of old reel-to-reel machines and had to rebuild the amplifiers in them so that they'd work.
Sure. Yeah.
So if I get hold of the tape, I can play it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I took a really good, high-quality, top-end cassette deck around with headphones, and we listened to it, and he hadn't heard it for 10 years or more himself.
Yeah, sure.
So, and we transferred it to digital for him and put it on a CD so he can listen to it. So it's come into the modern technology, but it's still not out there.
You need to YouTube
right?
that shit. That needs to go on YouTube. That needs to get out there.
Well, that's
WikiLeaks it.
that could probably
break into the house and then send it to WikiLeaks.
that could happen. Look, the younger brother of the missing pilot, would like to hear what I've heard. He hasn't heard what I've heard.
Yeah, right.
His father was given an edited down version, which just had his brother's voice on it only, none of the rest of the conversation.
It's so strange. Who's covering that up?
The father of the missing pilot requested that they give him a copy of the tape, and they only gave an edited down version.
Yeah.
But this guy that let me listen to it had the full thing.
Exactly. Who's they?
The Department of Transport.
The Department of Transport?
Yeah, back then.
They're making decisions about our knowledge.
35 years
these
ago.
things.
It's not policy to release the last words of a pilot that's gone missing. It's not policy to release that to the public.
Yeah.
But the father requested it because it was the last known recording of his son's voice. And so they released just his son's voice to him.
Yeah.
Not the whole conversation. So anyway, they'd like to hear it. So this guy who's got it, who I put it on disc for him, I made another copy of it last time I saw him and put it in an envelope with the name and address of the brother of the missing pilot. And I said, here, post this. He said, look, I will, but I want to talk to him first. So he wants to get legal advice first. But the family should have a copy, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then it's up to them if they want to release it. I mean, if Richard, the younger brother Richard, if he's happy about it, and he seems to be pretty open about it. He rings up for all this time, there's not going to be a great panic now after all these years.
Yeah, definitely.
He'd like to put it out, and if he gets hold of it, he'll probably put it on YouTube, I reckon.
Yeah, look.
And then it'll go viral.
Yeah, certainly.
But it's only going to happen if he does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah, I mean...
But that's a pretty interesting conversation between the pilot and the air traffic guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
And I mean, there's nothing you can do at the end of a radio.
No.
And he didn't say it was a UFO. But it
was an unidentified flying object.
He couldn't identify it.
So it was
and it was
UFO.
big, and it disappeared, and it came back, and then he disappeared.
Yeah, certainly.
And it was a very strange sound at the end of the tape.
Yeah, well, I mean, shit.
And that happened.
Sounds sus.
It's like 34 years ago that happened.
34 years
35 years
What's going
ago
on
this
lately?
year.
But like, is there anything? I can't find anything. There's nothing really Australian based too much in YouTube. They say like